Hello there. For each of my 3D printing projects, I try to create a new challenge for myself. I've already tried doing something large, like this statue of Athena, a famous historical statue that once stood in the Parthenon in ancient Greece. And I always wanted a model of the Nautilus from the Walt Disney movie 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Each of those projects took a long time. That 1/3 part of the Nautilus took over 63 hours. But in terms of challenges, this helped me overcome my fear of doing 3 and 4 day long prints, including printing while I was asleep. Next, I wanted to try a simple 2-color print. Since the Adventure 4 can only print 1 color at a time, I started thinking about using the slicer's pause command to temporarily pause a print and then do a real change to add a different color starting at the next layer. I found this artwork online for the tomb lid of Pakal, a Mayan king who died around 638 AD. This tomb lid is provocative because it looks like Pakal is sitting in a chair with hands on navigation controls and flames coming out the rear like a rocket. 638 AD. Very interesting. The challenge, though, here was to take the tomb lid artwork and get it to print as a 3D filament path. So the trick here was to use a JPEG to STL converter, and there's a bunch of them free online. Once the JPEG was converted to the STL format, you can load the STL file directly into your 3D editor, which in this case I printed over a white base. This worked amazingly well, though I did encounter a few issues. Initially, the question came up, should I print 1 layer of black or 2? It turned out for the black on white, 2 layers of black were way too dark and contrasty, so 1 layer looked best, and that I determined through experimentation. For other color combinations, though, I found I might need 2 colors of the line work, and I needed to run test prints to decide which I liked best. Now here's another tip. For these pen-like illustrations, I found slowing the illustration part down helped enormously. While I could print the white base at, say, 40 or 50 millimeters per second, I needed to slow the black artwork down to the almost ridiculously slow 4 millimeters per second to get the accuracy I wanted. It also helped the lines adhere better to the base, which, if you look closely, you can see in this video that 1 layer of the artwork was already printed in the base color of white. Now, why did I do that? Because there's a bug in the Adventure 4 firmware. When you pause between print layers in your slicer, so you can change filament reels to a new color, the printer is supposed to pause after printing out the previous layer completely. But the Adventure 4 doesn't do that. Some data must get buffered, and after you've changed filament colors and restart the print, it prints the last few bits of the previous layer, causing a disastrous blemish. You can see that here, where I changed to black and resumed printing, expecting it to start with the text. But instead, it stroked the last few lines of the previous layer in the corner. I created a trouble ticket for this, but it hasn't been fixed yet. Anyway, just print 1 layer of artwork in your base color. Then, when you switch colors, you won't see any bits of previous layers ruining your print. I hope that's clear. Okay, so moving on. With the success of the Pakal print, I started thinking about more complex color combinations. And this Mayan calendar seemed to offer opportunities because of its concentric design, which I thought I could separate nicely into different layers. Here I again used the JPEG to STL file conversion, then split that into 5 separately printable parts, each using a second color on the top. I split the largest ring into 2 parts to maximize the size of my design. Each of those just barely fit on the build plate, and that, by the way, also dictated the size of the overall print. And finally I glued everything together. Now here's another tip. If you're going to be gluing things together, it's easier to glue pieces that fit flush against one another, like those 2 outer rings. Can you imagine the difficulty if they were sliced into thirds? I hope you're getting the feel for the patience required doing things like this, and also the experimentation. It's part of the fun, using your machine, running tests to figure things out. And behind each of my finished prints, there were many more test prints to make sure my basic ideas were working. One of the major points of this video, then, is test prints are your friend, especially to check on parts that need to fit together or fit inside one another. As I said, I like printing things that are a challenge, and for my next project, I happened upon this ancient board game, which Irving Finkel, a curator at the British Museum, demonstrated here online. Fascinating. Doing a little research, I found nice-looking laser-cut wood versions of the game online, and that gave me an idea. Could I 3D print this game using 2-color printing for the playing squares, and maybe even get different colors for each square? I guess it goes without saying that this and all of the other projects I've been talking about required some sort of a 3D editor, and I am, of course, using one. And there are many free 3D editors available, so I'm not going to be discussing those here. But I would like to point out that learning how to use a 3D editor really opens up the enjoyment of 3D printing, because now you can design your own stuff. So in my 3D editor, I started laying out the shape of the base game board. I was thinking 2 millimeters of red trim along the top might look nice too. And that worked out well. It was too big to fit on my build plate, so I printed these as 2 halves, which I glued together. Next came the more involved part, designing the playing squares and their distinctive patterns. The basic idea is to draw lines, or splines as they're called in the 3D editor, into the shapes that you want to form, and here's 2 examples. Sometimes the 3D printed lines, the extrusions, they don't work. So you have to try a different design or try other things like changing your printing or fan speeds. As I mentioned earlier, slowing the nozzle down to 4 millimeters per second and lowering manually the Z height through the control panel, I found most helpful. Notice the difference. Much better. And finally, here's all of the pieces. I think it looks pretty cool. To finish it off, I printed a case for the game, starting with a small fit tolerance test, and then the 2 halves that fit on either side. So there it is, the Royal Game of Ur. I hope you can see how much fun I had designing and printing this project. You learn a lot about 3D printing and your equipment. And with that, I thank you for watching.